What's up, everyone? I'm Ethan, and I'm here with my boy Garrett, and welcome to HIVE Sports Podcast, where we talk all things NFL and college football. Today, we are going over a consensus top 5 NFL draft prospects and one sleeper at the quarterback and running back positions.
And we're going to try to keep it brief, but it's going to be difficult because especially with this running back class this year, I'm looking at the position and I'm thinking to myself, there could be 20 plus guys that end up being relevant at some fashion at the next level. That's just something you don't see very often. So it's a special running back class. I'm sure that's not the first time you've heard this, but we're going to dig into that. And we're also going to look at quarterback, and maybe it's not the high-end talent of last year with Caleb and Jaden. And, you know, Bo Nix obviously ascending in the way
Drake
that
May.
He has. Drake May. So it's not going to be the quarterback class of last year, but there are quite a few names that could end up being legitimate starters at the NFL level. So we're looking forward to getting into it. Just jumping right into it, our first sleeper is going to be at quarterback, and that's going to be Will Howard. All right, so Will Howard is a guy who transferred from Kansas State to Ohio State, came in his first year at Ohio State, led his team to the national championship, right? So that alone, I think it deserves some recognition for a team that wants to win at the next level, wants to get over that hump, whatever it may be. I think Will Howard has shown that he can perform his best in the biggest games. And he showed that in that playoff run. It was a very impressive run, despite the talent that he had around him. It still takes a
lot
leader.
of talent.
But it still takes a leader, right? To come in there to tie it all together. You look at Ohio State the year before with Kyle McCord, they lost to Michigan twice, and when they didn't have the right quarterback in there, they weren't Ohio State anymore. So you look at Will Howard, he brought him back to glory, and I think he deserves some recognition for that.
Yeah, agreed. And I think he's probably our least slept on pick for this video, but I think people sleep on the fact that, he has a very strong arm, has that good large quarterback size that we like to see, right? Somewhere around that 6'4", 260-ish size. And he has that sneaky running ability that at the next level, we're starting to see a lot more of being really important, right? Those for 1 yard, 2 yard QB sneaks or those QB runs, on the goal line have become more and more prevalent in the NFL. And I think he brings us that he can definitely bring to a team at the next level.
260, man. I don't know if he's fighting Josh Allen.
How big is he actually? Let's look.
He's
I don't know.
About 230, 235. He's a big boy.
He looks big.
I'm teasing.
Yeah, I'm just kidding. Didn't know exactly, but I knew he was big enough.
No, he's a guy who's, like you said, he's gonna get you those 2 yards if you need him. You can direct snap it to him. He's gonna run up. He's gonna run someone over. He'll keep those legs driving. He has the size. He has that prototypical 6'4" plus, size and arm strength to go with it. So you look at his PFF grade, and he was a great deep ball passer last year, man. And it does help when you have Jeremiah Smith out there that you're throwing the ball to. But it's a strength of his, and I think it's going to translate well to the next level. But there are obviously some things that he needs to improve as well.
Yeah, I think right off the bat, ball security is a huge one. I think at the next level, we've seen guys who immediately kind of lower their stock when they get an opportunity if they can't hold on to the ball. So, having 8 fumbles in 2024 is a number that, we really want to see at the next level much, much lower.
Yeah. And he also kind of struggled over the middle of the field at times. I think that you look at his mechanics, and he got a little tight at times. His feet get stagnant, when he's under pressure, and it's a little perplexing as to how he was struggling over the middle of the field when you look at, he had Emeka Egbuka out there, probably the best slot receiver in the nation last year, got Jeremiah Smith, probably the best freshman wide receiver in the last 10 years. So it's hard to make excuses for him. And I think that's why people are so hard on him when they're evaluating him, because they know, man, this guy had one of the best offensive lines in the nation. He had 2 of the top running backs in the nation. He had an insane receiving core. So there's a lot of pressure on him to meet the expectations, but he did it. He did it last year. So, there's a chance he could do it at the next level.
And, I've seen some mocks where, he's the, 4th or 5th quarterback coming off the board. So, I definitely wouldn't be shocked to, see him as a number 4, number 5 quarterback off the board. But I think we have 5 guys that we're higher on, which doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be drafted before Will Howard, but I think just talent wise, we like. So I think that's a good.
Real quick though, let's jump into his. Where do you expect him to go in the NFL draft? Just so we can kind of give the people a preview. Where do you expect him to go? Because I'm looking at it and I think he's probably a second to third round guy, possibly second. But I want to hear your thoughts on it as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think a mid second is a round that I could definitely see. I think he's a guy that has a lot of he has that look value to him, right? I mean, he kind of has that prototypical NFL quarterback stature. A lot of GMs like guys with a lot of good experience too. The fact that he has been a starter for several years at high caliber teams and was a good starter at every single season. I think teams would be very, very happy to get him in the second or third round, especially with the caliber of talent that we're seeing with the other quarterbacks.
Yeah, I think that's a good transition point to hop into our next guy, Quinn Ewers, University of Texas, one of the highest rated quarterback recruits in the last few years that we've seen. And he's getting a little bit hated on. And some people will probably doubt our spot here. But what do you got to say about that?
Let me start off by saying that I recognize that not everybody agrees that Quinn Ewers is the 5th best quarterback in this draft. But when I think of quarterbacks that have success at the next level, that might not be the super flashy guys like the Jalen Milroe or the, Shedeur Sanders, like we'll talk about later on. We've seen a lot of NFL guys go under the radar who, are kind of that average athleticism, like Quinn, who ran a 4.7, so he's not slow, but he had lots of good experience in college. Somebody who for several years played against the top defenses in the nation and performed pretty well. One thing that I really like about his game, which that throw right there is a good example, is he's a guy that has amazing touch on his ball. I mean, he can put the ball in places that are super narrow. And I think at the next level, that's a super important quality, because you're not going to have these big separations like you see at the collegiate level. What do you think about some of the things that you like seeing him, that might transition well to the next level?
No, absolutely, man. I think we were talking about Quinn earlier, and you kind of brought up Brock Purdy as a name that you kind of saw some similarities in, and I really like that comp. And we also have Andy Dalton as a similar level talent that we like to compare him to. But his touch on the ball is just it's definitely up there with the best in the class. He can put that touch. He can lob it over defenders. The tight window throws is something that you want to see, because obviously everything is going to be a tighter window at the next level. But I think there's a lot to like with Quinn, and people kind of assume he played at Texas. He probably had, the best weapons around him. I don't think that was always true. And you look at this Georgia tape right here, he's putting the ball in some really nice spots for his receivers, and his offensive line was letting him down at times, especially against Georgia, man. He was running for his life the whole game. And Marcus Golden's getting a lot of love. Isaiah Bond was a guy who was getting some hype. But in my eyes, that's not even close to the level of talent that we just talked about with Will Howard at Ohio State. Totally. So I think he did make the most out of what he was working with as a whole.
And, he's, when kind of looking at his stats, he was 92nd percentile for his deep ball passes while still being under quite a bit of pressure, right? And so that transitions really well to the next level. I will say you made a good point, with kind of having that pressure. We do see that in, kind of his ratings when it comes to handling pressure, him being in the 42nd percentile, which isn't great, right? And I think that's one thing that you and I have discussed about. Sorry, I'm just distracted by Gunnar Helm there. That was a sick play by Gunnar. But one thing about Quinn Ewers that I'm hoping can be improved to the next level is his composure in the pocket. There were times where he might have heard some footsteps and maybe was a little bit panicky and decided to kind of force balls into windows that I think ultimately were costly to the team. That is something that I think at the next level can be coached. I think coaches can help him with his composure in the pocket and kind of force him to stay in the pocket. And I think just having a better offensive line can really, help that composure when you're standing in the pocket and have, 300-pound D lineman chasing after you.
No, I think that's a great point. And I think the two things that he needs to work on the most, like you said, under pressure, he kind of panics a little bit, kind of cracks under pressure at times. The accuracy falls off quite a bit. Also, though, I want to say there was times where he was pretty good under pressure. Like you turn on that Michigan tape, he's making great throw after great throw, and that was an elite defense, man. Michigan is a defense that gave Jalen Milroe a lot of trouble. It gave a lot of good quarterbacks a ton of trouble, and he had a great game against Michigan. Then you kind of you look at that Georgia tape, and he was really struggling to the point where he got benched for Arch for a little bit. But just kind of speaking off that point, he did have Arch Manning behind him for 2 years, and Steve Sarkisian trusted him and believed in him enough to say, hey,
very good point.
Quinn Ewers is our guy. I'm not benching him, and he brought him back in that same game, in fact. So that speaks volumes to me.
Now, Garrett, I feel like he's a pretty hard person to, figure out what his draft capital is. Do you have any thoughts on, where you think he might go, what round? I've seen kind of ranges of, second to fourth round, day 2 guy, maybe touching day 3. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think that we can pretty safely assume he's not a day 1 guy at this point. Yeah. But with the caliber of a prospect he was coming out of high school, I think teams remember this. GMs look at that, and he's one of the highest rated 5 stars in recent years coming out of high school. And he didn't do a ton to ruin that in college, and he had some very good years. And he's a three-year producer, so I think it's just going to take one team, man, to turn on that tape and say, hey, this is our Andy Dalton, this is our Brock Purdy. We're going to get him in the 2nd or 3rd round, and we're going to be stealing from the rest of the league.
I think he is a guy that, although I think he has very good talent, you put him in a good system, and I could see him being very successful.
Absolutely. I think we can jump into our next guy at this point, which is going to be Jalen Milroe. All right, so moving on from Quinn, going on to our number 4 quarterback is Jalen Milroe out of Alabama.
Your boy Jalen.
This is my guy. And at times I thought, man, this guy's going to be a top 5 pick. After that Georgia game, I know we just talked about the Georgia game against Quinn, and this is kind of on the other end of the spectrum. Jalen Milroe had his best game against Georgia, which is 100%. Probably the best defense he played. And that's what's so hard to figure out about him, man, is like he plays such an elite game against Georgia, and then you see him struggling against South Carolina, struggling against Auburn. There's times where he looks lost out there. He's making silly mistakes. He's turning the ball over, and you kind of wonder which guy am I getting? Am I getting this guy who looks like a potential elite dual threat quarterback at the next level, or am I going to get the guy who's
100%.
Making silly decisions, looking like he's kind of lost out there on the field? But I'm curious what you think about Jalen.
I mean, his dual threat capability is undeniable. I mean, he is a freak athlete. What is he? He's 6'2", weighing at 225.
Yeah.
Right, running a 4.4. I mean, he can run with the best of them. And it's not like he's one of those prospects, right? We've seen some dual threat guys coming out of college that, we knew were kind of runners. We have the Terrell Pryors, we have the Denard Robinsons. You have these guys that, really relied on his running game. But Jalen Milroe has an arm, right? We have seen him make those throws. We've also just seen him make throws that were your eyes closed, and like you said, I hope, and I think based on his work ethic, that he's the type of guy that we will get the Georgia, his play in the Georgia game versus his play in maybe some other games that weren't as pretty. I think.
You speak to just to jump in real quick though. You speak to that work ethic, right? And I think it's important for the people to know this guy is getting into the building at 3, 4, 5 a.m. every day. Ryan Williams was on an interview, and he's saying, I'm trying to be the first guy in the building, but every time I show up to the building, Jalen Milroe's truck is already there. So 100%. I think that's really important, right? Because he's a guy who obviously needs to develop. He's not a finished product going into the next level. But if you have that work ethic, you're willing to put in the time, watch the tape, work on his mechanics a little bit. I think he needs to improve his timing, his footwork.
Yeah.
And I think that those things are why he struggles so much with those short to intermediate throws, right? Because he's a very good deep ball thrower. He was over a 90 grade on PFF for deep balls, right? So he has a huge arm. He can make all the throws, just he's struggling to do it consistently and to really put it all together in a consistent fashion.
100%. But you know what? You and I were talking about it earlier, right? And we remember when, Anthony Richardson, which was also a raw prospect coming out of college with really 1 year of production, and then became, this early first round draft prospect. And I don't know about you, and I'm curious your thoughts. I'm taking Milroe without even thinking about, the kind of mental strength of Milroe versus Anthony Richardson, leaving a game because he's tired. I'm taking Milroe's talent as well. I mean, what do you think about that? Like, I think Milroe's a guy that people are very much disrespecting. He was one of the best players on a very good team.
Yeah, I mean, I think without even considering the intangibles, like you said, I will take his tape over AR every day of the week.
100%.
I mean, Anthony Richardson's a guy who you saw flashes, right? But I think Jalen Milroe has shown more consistent flashes than Anthony Richardson did. And AR is a guy who got pushed up the board quite a bit just because he hit the Megatron at his pro day, right? Because he has this cannon of an arm. He's an incredible athlete. You could say the same thing about Jalen Milroe, but Jalen Milroe showed consistent growth over his college career. I mean, he's a guy who got benched when Nick Saban was still there, right? He got benched for, I believe it was Simpson at Bama.
Yeah.
And he, instead of kind of shutting down, oh, maybe I'm not that dude, he took that as a challenge. And that was the same year where he had that last second throw against Auburn, right? In that classic rivalry game where that says something about him, man. He's a competitor. He's a gamer. And he's shown a lot of clutch factor. So I like the kid, and I think it's going to depend on where does he land at the next level. Does he
100%.
land with a coach who's going to be patient with him, who's going to help him improve his weaknesses, or does he land with a franchise that's just going to throw him into the fire and say you gotta be our guy right away? So
100%.
I think that's going to be a big indicator.
And I don't like comparing him to two of the top three quarterbacks in the league, but I do see flashes of like the rawness that we saw of Lamar and of Josh Allen kind of combined coming out of college. He doesn't necessarily have the arm strength that Josh Allen had coming out of college, but you saw what a little bit of patience with Josh Allen did. I mean, it took him to the next level as one of the best quarterbacks in the league within a couple of years out of college from a no-name school. I knew, University of Wyoming isn't a no-name school, but still, he's playing way less caliber of talent than Jalen Milroe did in college, and people are still willing to take that risk on him because of his arm strength. Jalen Milroe still has an arm strength.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought up Josh Allen because who helped develop Josh Allen is Brian Daboll, who's now with the New York Giants. And the New York Giants have been mocking him in the beginning of the second round pretty consistently from what I've seen. They brought him in for a top 30 visit. So I think that speaks to, I think they like this kid, man. And if he lands with a guy like Brian Daboll, he's a quarterback whisperer, and he's gonna help this kid fix his issues. And if he did it with Josh Allen, who was throwing for like 50% completion percentage in the Mountain West, I think he can do it with this Jalen Milroe, who ran for 32 touchdowns in the last 2 years in the SEC and has all these big games on his resume.
Totally. And, last point here, because I know we got to move on, but you talk about the Giants being a good fit, but he also would have two great quarterback leaders in front of him. He has the kind of the mindset coach of Jameis Winston, and then has kind of the quarterback play and the intelligence of Russell Wilson. So I really like that fit there too. And I think the Giants, would be very, very happy with him at the beginning of the second round.
100%. And I think that he and our number 3 quarterback are pretty close. They're pretty interchangeable, just to kind of preview it a little bit. Yeah. But I think this is a good transition point to jump into our number 3 quarterback, Jaxson Dart. So Jaxson Dart is a guy who has the size, he has the arm strength. He's one of the best deep ball passers in college football last year. and there's a lot to like about him. I will say, I don't think he has the ceiling that Jalen Milroe has. But then again, Daniel Jeremiah just came out recently and said Jalen Milroe is probably the highest ceiling guy in the entire quarterback class, probably a higher ceiling than Cam Ward. So that's hard to measure up to. But this is a guy who I think has a higher floor than Jalen Milroe, and that's why we gave him the nod over Jalen, is because he's a consistently accurate passer. And you see some of the throws he's making on tape. He puts a ball on a dime, 40, 50, 60 yards down the field. 100%. He can throw off platform. He gets out of the pocket well. So I think there's a lot to like about Jaxson Dart, and I'm curious your thoughts on him as well.
Yeah, and I think, that last throw was a good example too, is his timing. He's a guy that is willing to get the ball out of his hands. We see at the next level, at the NFL level, guys who do really well are guys that can make those awkward throws, who can make those throws on the run, and who are on time with their throws. And when you watch his tape, it's consistent. He's very quick to get the ball out of his hands. He's able to make those tough throws on the run, and he just is willing to keep those eyes downfield as he's moving around in the pocket and kind of moving, rolling out to the left or the right. So definitely agree with what you're saying about his throwing ability. And I think not only is he has that good arm that, makes him kind of the third best prospect, but he's also not a bad athlete too. He can definitely run around a bit. He has a good stature with him and is, willing to put that shoulder down when he needs to.
And he's a guy he's kind of been a riser throughout the draft process because he was very good at the combine. Before that, he was the best performer at the Senior Bowl, where some other guys struggled. He was consistent. He was a very good performer throughout the entire week at practice, and also in the Senior Bowl game itself, he was probably the best performer. So that's something that speaks a lot to, hey, this guy's coming out there. He's prepared. He's ready to go. And I mean, he's going up draft boards quite a bit. So I'm curious.
But yeah,
go ahead, jump in.
I am a little worried though. Right, we saw in 2023 we kind of had those Will Levis whispers around the corners, where people were like, oh, this guy, Will Levis is going to be the first quarterback drafted, or he's going to be top 10, kind of weeks before, 1 or 2 weeks before the draft, you kind of hear these rumors. And my thing is, Jaxson Dart is a great quarterback, and I think a team will be very happy taking him, in the late first. But I think that the top 2 quarterbacks are clear, in my opinion, and we'll get to them obviously later on. But, I try my best not to, listen to all those little rumors that go around because, there was talk where Will Levis was going to be the first quarterback drafted at number 1 overall. It went from, he'd be lucky to get out of the first to, he might go first overall within like a week. So, he did perform well at the Senior Bowl, did well at the Combine, and I think he's very deserving of a first round placement, but I still like the other 2 a little bit more.
Oh, and that's a legitimate concern. And I think the other thing that I want to point out is it is a gimmicky offensive scheme at Ole Miss, right? Matt Corral is another guy I liked a lot coming out of school, and I felt a little bit silly about it down the road, because he didn't quite pan out at the next level. He never really got the opportunity, but I think teams saw that offensive scheme. They said, hey, this is a guy who he's putting up these numbers because of the scheme, not necessarily because of his talent. And I think they don't take a lot of snaps from under center. It's a shotgun, only type scheme. So it's going to be interesting to see how does he learn like a more of an NFL offense? Is he able to pick it up quickly? Is he going to struggle? That is one concern of mine. I think that if he does end up busting or ending up not meeting expectations, it'll probably have something to do with trying to make that adjustment from Ole Miss.
Well, and there's a few pretty good Ole Miss quarterbacks that go back pretty far. I think of like Shea Patterson or Chad Kelly or, those guys that like had good careers. So I hope Jaxson Dart, kind of fixes that Ole Miss superstition where they're just elite college quarterbacks and can transition.
How are you gonna leave out my boy Eli Manning when you're talking about Ole Miss, good Ole Miss quarterbacks, bro? You did them dirty,
man. Now that's the University of Mississippi. That's not. Yeah, Ole Miss.
That is Ole Miss.
I know.
Yeah. I'm a Giants fan too, so that's like a double whammy. But
I know.
we like the kid. We think he has some nice upside. I think he has a higher floor than Milroe, maybe not the ceiling. So, but at the same time, like you said, there's a clear tier drop from the top 2 to number 3. In my opinion. So we'll jump into number 2.
Yep. Good transition to number 2, Shedeur Sanders. All right. And we spoke about Jaxson Dart kind of getting the last 1 to 2 weeks of a push up the boards. And we're hearing a lot of rumors of Shedeur Sanders kind of doing the opposite, which to me is a little bit, I'm a little bit kind of weary of listening to those rumors though, because, I like what I see on film with him. He's a guy that has that Sanders blood, which, means he's a gamer. He's tough as they come. He's a guy that wants to be out there and wants to play. He's a guy that, kind of has that swagger with him and produce well. I mean, he had a 74% completion rate, in 2024, nearly a 4-to-1 touchdown interception ratio. So, I mean, the guy can play. And one thing that I think stands out the most beyond his stats and beyond, the gimmicks that kind of come with being a Sanders and, having your dad being one of the best of all time, is he's fundamentally pretty strong. He has good zip on his ball, great throwing mechanics. He's keeps his eyes downfield, is willing to, put the ball in play, to use a baseball analogy. And so I really like that. And I think his underrated mobility running at 4.65 definitely will translate well at the next level when he has to scramble at times. But I know some people don't always love his swagger, and think that there might be some red flags. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the concerns I have are not with the tape. It's not with the statistics. He's the most accurate college football passer of all time, which his daddy Dion loves to say, whenever he gets opportunity to. But he's not lying, man. I mean, 74% completion rate is nasty, and he's a guy who can make all the throws. He's getting better every year of college. He starts at Jackson State. He's going up a big time. I mean, he made a big jump, I think, from his first year to where he's at now. 100%. And he's a guy who elevates the players around him. And it's hard for me to see him failing at the next level. The only concerns I have is just with a little bit of the Dion circus that he's going to bring to town, right? It's going to always be a lot of media coverage. Can he handle that? I think he can, like you spoke to. But there's a time where he was up against Nebraska, lost against a true freshman, Dylan Raiola, and they kind of questioned him a little bit, right? You see the score right here, 28-0. Nebraska just kind of beat them down, and I think it kind of speaks volumes how you react to that as a leader. And after the game, they interviewed him about it, and he said, if I had the kind of protection that the other kid had on the other side of Nebraska, it wouldn't have been a close game. He kind of threw his offensive line under the bus a little bit, which I don't love to see. Maybe he knows something I don't. Maybe that's how he needed to motivate his offensive line. But that it's a bit of a red flag. The ego is a little bit of a problem, but I don't think it's going to be too much of a problem at the next level.
Listen, and I 100% agree with that. I played football my whole life. Throwing people under the bus is definitely not the way to go about it. But man, was that offensive line really bad. And they were bad both years he was at Colorado, right? I mean, he was one of the most sacked quarterbacks in FBS. He's a guy that is having to do a lot. And I recognize that there is some frustration that come with that, especially as a team that was hoping to have college football playoff contentions, right? But that being said, that kind of does go into some of the things that I think at the next level needs to improve on. He held onto the ball way too long in 2024 at times. He averaged 3 seconds holding onto the ball before he had a pass, which is very long. And, I think with him trying to kind of play hero ball at times and, make these plays, try not to get sacked, these different things, that caused him to hold onto the ball. It causes him to force the ball across the middle. And, statistically, his throwing over the middle was much, much more poor than, throwing to the left and throwing to the right. Now, to me, there's an asterisk there, because if you're getting chased by 300-pound defensive linemen a second into holding onto the ball, or, a second into getting the ball snapped, you have to run away from them. So, I think at the next level, that's something that with a stronger offensive line can really be, reduced. And I think he has the technique and the tangibles to really have a strong NFL career. And I would love to see him go to a team that has a good, one and done mentor quarterback. You mentioned the Giants earlier about, Jalen Milroe, but would love to see Jameson, and Russ with Shedeur. Could see him with, the Raiders with Geno Smith and Pete Carroll, maybe the Browns like that. I think he has a lot to bring to a team. And I think he, to me, is the true number 2 quarterback in this draft.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And just, you talk about Geno in Vegas, and I think that's a kind of a good comp for him. And maybe some people will be like, hey, you're hating on Shedeur. You're comparing him to Geno. What are you doing out here? He's
Come on, Pro Bowler.
But hey, Geno's a guy who he can definitely lead a team to the playoffs. He's done it before. He's a solid quarterback. And I think that is probably more of like a floor comp for him. I think Shedeur has a high floor. I don't know if he has the ceiling of some other guys that we've seen in recent years, but it's hard to see him fail at the next level. And I'm excited to see where he goes in the NFL draft. Is it smoke that he's slipping? Is he still going to go top 5? It's a lot is still kind of up in the air with him, but it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
100%. Well, that leaves us to our number 1 guy, Cam Ward, University of Miami.
All right, so Cam Ward, our number 1 quarterback of the 2025 draft class, is largely an underdog, right? He started out at Incarnate Ward, and he worked his way up through the ranks.
I think he was a 0-star out of high school. I think he was very, very much an underdog.
To start as a 0-star, and now he's going to be the surefire number 1 pick in the NFL draft. That's a fun guy to root for. And I think you kind of seen the potential even starting at his days in Incarnate Ward. I was just amazed with how calm he was under pressure. He could sling the ball all over the field, but it's just like that composure that he has in the pocket, which is very rare to see from a guy. And he showed growth, and he showed the ability he transitioned well to Washington State, and he transitioned well to Miami. And I bet on him to transition well to the NFL. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I actually really love when I see people kind of move up in talent or move up in competition and still perform at a high level. I did watch him, as an FCS guy myself, I watched him at Incarnate Ward, in play, and he was the dude. And, him moving to Washington State, I wasn't surprised. I think it was his head coach actually that moved to Washington State at that time, but don't quote me on that. But nonetheless, he was the dude at Washington State. And then when he went to Miami, he was the dude at Miami. And that to me shows a good trajectory of him being the dude at the NFL. You mentioned his composure. Rarely do you see a quarterback that's just so calm and so patient in the pocket than Cam Ward. We talked about other guys earlier who might be a little bit frantic and a little bit panicky and hears those footsteps. There's times where I'm like, I'm the one who's panicking, and I'm like, Cam, dude, don't you hear those footsteps right behind you? And he's still just patient, and he just can get the ball off so quick, can make those awkward throws. And, I was really impressed with him, this season. I was really impressed.
No, I think that's a great point. And it's so impressive how he keeps his eyes downfield despite the fact that he's running sideways, being chased by 3 guys at once. It's hard for him not to look down the field when he's getting pressured, which is, that's a hard skill, especially for guys at this level. You look at Jalen Milroe, gets pressured, kind of just puts his eyes down and runs. Like we said, Quinn Ewers kind of struggles under pressure, but Cam Ward, man, he's getting decked throwing 40-yard dimes like this. And it's hard not to love the guy. He's making all kinds of off-platform throws.
And being willing to take a lick and to make the throw really motivates a team around you, right? If you're willing to put your body on the line, your offensive line, your teammates around you, they love that, and that inspires them. And I think he's the guy that is willing to do whatever it takes for his team to win.
Yeah, I know we talked a little bit earlier about how he kind of big broed Shedeur a little bit when they're throwing the ball together. He has that aura, man. He has that. Yeah. He's just a leader. That's who he is. And he's been that way his entire college career. He's a guy who elevates the players around him. 100%. Miami's not a team that had elite wide receiver play. they sure as hell didn't have elite offensive line play. But they were in contention for the college football playoff almost the whole year. And I believe he had multiple comeback wins. Yep, I'm looking at it now. 3 comeback wins from down 10 or more in 2024.
Yeah.
So that's also something I love to see.
And you know what? That's funny that you said that, because we were talking earlier, and I don't like comping people to, one of the best to ever do it, but I just see flashes of Patrick Mahomes. Not necessarily the same arm strength, and there are other things that Patrick Mahomes have that Cam Ward doesn't. But the awkward throws he can make, and the kind of aura of no matter what the score is in the game, they're going to win this game, or there's a good chance that he's going to come back and win this game. That translates so well to the next level. And I just love that about him. Like, he can just make those awkward throws. His team is always in games. He can launch that ball 60 yards downfield on a dime to a receiver, and next you know it, they're only down 3 points, right? And so those are some things that I think will translate well.
No, I love the guy, and he's an easy one to root for. And it'll be interesting to see what Tennessee does in the draft as far as surrounding him with talent, right? Because we got Calvin Ridley, we got Chiga Okonkwo, and I guess Nick Westbrook-Akine is their third option.
I guess.
There's not a lot behind that, right? So
yeah.
it'll be interesting. But
we'll talk about...
He's deserving of the number 1 quarterback. So.
Totally. And we'll talk about, later on how deep, the wide receiver and the running back class is. And I think Tennessee would be would kind of not do themselves a favor by not putting some weapons around Cam Ward. So definitely think they should take advantage of getting some good steals later in the draft.
Couldn't agree more. I think that's a good spot to jump into our sleeper at running back. And this is a guy you are intimately familiar with, so I'm going to let you take the lead on this one.
Big fan. Sleeper out of UC Davis, my alma mater right there. Lan Larrison. Yes, so Lan's a guy that I think a lot of people are starting to become a little bit more familiar with this game. I obviously we listen to some podcasts and some videos, and I see people sneak them into their conversations. But when I tell you this guy has the ability to make impact on Sundays, or I guess Thursdays and Mondays, or Saturdays sometimes too, this guy has it all. I mean, he had over 2,300 yards of total offense last year on a very good UC Davis team. Of those, 850 yards were receiving. I mean, he's so balanced as a player. They line him out as the number 1 wide receiver. He runs, digs or posts across the field, catches it with one hand. Very balanced, very fluid. And he also has that straight line speed that a lot of people like to see in a good prospect. I mean, he ran a 4.46 at 210 pounds. He can not only run straight very, very well, but he's impossible to tackle one-on-one. He's got great balance and is a very fluid runner. And I think he is a very, very underrated guy that will make waves at the next level.
Absolutely. I couldn't have laid it out better myself, man. I mean, when you see a guy who's taking wildcat snaps, he's lining up at wide receiver, mossing guys out wide. And I mean, he's just such a complete running back. And he's a guy who I think teams are going to look at and say, this is someone who can be a passing game weapon for me, in addition to being a very solid running back. So there's a ton of value to that.
Well, and I see a lot of guys talking about, him potentially being a slot receiver, and there's comments of his size. I mean, 5'11", 210 is a decent sized running back. I mean, that's an ideal size running back, and you're running a 4.46. And I mean, he's not a guy that's just going to, break a tackle by, juking someone out or being shifty. I mean, he'll lower his shoulder and, he'll run you over at times, and so, he's a guy that not only is a very elite offensive weapon, but I've also seen him be one of the best return men in college football. And I think that's a great opportunity for him as somebody who might need to show and kind of prove himself. I mean, he's a guy that could be an amazing special teams player and an elite return man on any NFL team.
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to see one on this highlight clip, but I mean, you mentioned about how many different ways he can make a guy miss. I think one thing that I love about him is his ability to hurdle guys. I mean, it's just something that not everyone can do, right? You see it from Saquon, you see it from some other guys at the next level. Najee was a guy who did it a lot at Alabama, but it's just so natural for him, and the timing of when to take off, and he has that burst, man. He's
100%.
got explosiveness to his game, so I don't think by any means is he some scat back who's just going to be a third down guy at the next level. I think he has true 3-down ability, and he's being absolutely underrated right now in talks.
And I think people are projecting him as an undrafted currently, but I mean, I think you get him. Shoot, I'll say if you get him rounds 5 through 7, I think it's a steal regardless. I mean, we've watched a lot of tape of these other running back prospects, and I think he fits in very well with some of the best of them. I think there is something to say about the competition, right? I know he played at an FCS level, but the way, film doesn't necessarily lie. Like, I don't care if the competition is maybe not as strong defensively. Just watching him as a runner and his ability to kind of make plays still speaks loudly. One thing that I'll also add, although he made a lot of people miss and he has a great balance, he only had about 3 yards per carry after contact, or 3 yards after contact per carry. But I kind of put an asterisk with that too, because he was the UC Davis offense. I mean, if you're a defense, you are stopping him, right? And so you are, giving him the Megatron treatment of putting 2 guys on him at once and, making sure that he doesn't beat you. So of course there's going to be swarms of people around him. So, if you have a chance to watch this guy's tape, please do. I mean, he has an opportunity to be one of the biggest steals that we'll see in the NFL draft this year.
And I could really see a team, man. I mean, in that 6th to 7th round range, if they don't want to risk letting him be undrafted, right? Because then it's kind of a toss-up if they're going to be able to sign him. If they want to ensure, I want this guy on my team, I could absolutely see someone say, hey, I'm going to take this guy in the 7th round. I'm going to make sure he's on our team. And there's been 7th round guys before, especially at the running back position, who've made a big impact. 6th, 7th, late day 3 guys who come 100%. In and make an impact. So I could really see him being one of them.
Totally. And I think, as we transition to our number 5 guy, I think there's kind of a similar trajectory of potential for him. So going into number 5, Cam Skattebo out of Arizona State. Cam Skattebo is probably the biggest riser that we saw of, draft capital, throughout the college football playoffs. I mean, I've never seen one player have a bigger game that kind of changed his life. A former FCS guy, Sac State also. I've actually seen him play in person several times before he went to Arizona State, and he's been a dog at every single level. And that's one thing that I think sets him apart from a lot of these guys. Everybody knows that he has elite balance. I mean, it takes several hits to get him, on the ground, as you can see in his film. But I mean, there's something to say about his just mentality. There's something about having that grit, having that mindset of, I'm going to lower my shoulder and I'm not falling, you are, right? Nowadays we don't see that too often, even at the running backs. Like we don't see a lot of these kind of bruisers who are willing to make contact with these guys. And I think it's refreshing to see a guy like Skattebo who is looking to hurt people. And I mean, it's crazy. And I know that, you watch film and you're like, man, how can this guy, I mean, he's not the fastest guy. He's not the biggest guy, but I mean, his balance and ball awareness is elite.
Oh, 100%, dude. I love to see the chip on his shoulder that he has. He just he's pissed off that he's not getting the recognition that he deserves. And you saw kind of the quotes that he was, it was out there in the media. Everyone knew it. I mean, he's talking about no one respects the fact that I'm the best running back in the nation. And then the way that he followed that up, though. He
did that right before the Texas game.
Yeah.
And then had one of the most elite college football games I've ever seen.
Oh, incredible game, man. He put that team on his back. I think it's worth mentioning that Jordan Tyson, Arizona State's top wide receiver, was out for the entire college football playoff, and specifically that game against Texas, right? So they did not have much of a passing game outside of throwing the ball deep to Mr. Cam Skattebo himself. So He just showed that he can put an entire offense on his back, and against a Texas defense, that is no
100%.
small feat.
100%. And I think of people, a lot of times when you think of a receiving back, you think of this kind of scat back which is funny, with his last name, but you think of this kind of quick, agile running back. But I mean, he has great hands, great ball awareness. He's able to make these kind of awkward catches and was a very, very effective receiving back, throughout 2023 and 2024. And I think one thing that a lot of people were saying about him that, he doesn't have that true elite kind of straight speed. But I mean, he ran a mid 4.6. I mean, he's not slow. And I mean, his game speed, I mean, I don't care if he ran a 5 flat. If you watch him on tape, I mean, he had plenty of 10+ yard runs, and he's breaking so many tackles, every time he touches the ball.
And he's an explosive guy, man. I mean, he had a 39, 40-inch vertical at the combine. So if he wasn't a good athlete, if he's not an explosive athlete, he's not going to have that kind of burst to his game, right? So maybe 100%. He's not a burner, in the straight line. But you look at Josh Jacobs, that guy ran a 4.7 coming out of Alabama, and he's had a nice career for himself at the next level. And I think that there are quite a few similarities between him and Josh Jacobs.
Totally. And I guess the one concern, and I'm curious your thoughts. I mean, often if you have a guy that's a bruiser and is, willing to, or not even willing, is wanting to kind of have those hits every play, you got to think they start adding up, right?
Yeah. That's probably the biggest concern for us, right? Is his body going to hold up with his style of play at the next level? And I think that he has to be smart. He has to know when to make business decisions. When is it not worth taking a crazy hit for 1 or 2 extra yards? I think if he is able to and I think that coaching will help with that too, right? If a team's making an investment in him, they're not going to want him just destroying his body in 1 or 2 years. They're going to want him to stay healthy for the duration of his rookie contract, which is 4+ years these days with the option at the end of it. So he's a guy who I can see like really, really being a big addition for a team.
100%. And I could see him being, getting picked earlier than, the fifth running back off the board. And I think he has a lot of, his stock is rising. He's proven himself. His combine numbers were better than people expected. And so I think that just, even though he wasn't the fastest runner out there, like he showed that he has enough speed. So definitely a big fan. At every level I've watched, he's been a guy that has kind of carried his team. So it'll be nice to kind of see him at the next level where, he's not necessarily, doesn't necessarily have to be the workhorse, back every time where, he's cramping up in, big time moments and, can't do a bunch after, running 25, 30 times in a game.
Yeah, but I mean, he has 3-down potential. I want to just say the last thing about him is he's a great pass catcher, man. And he's not just a guy who's going to be catching dump offs. He's a guy who's catching the ball down the field. I mean, you saw it against Texas. You see it against Utah here. He's a guy who's going to be utilized in the passing game at the next level. And it'll be interesting to see where he lands. But
100%. And I think, there's definitely arguments that he can move up to the number 4 spot. But that's a good transition into our number 4 prospect, Quinshon Judkins out of Ohio State.
All right, so Quinshon Judkins, a similarly violent runner. I think there are some similarities between him and Cam Skattebo. Quinshon's a little bit faster, a little bit better wiggle to his game, a little more straight line speed, but kind of a similar style, right? It's going to be, you're going to have to really hit him to bring him down, and often he's dishing out punishment. So this is a guy who I've loved him since his freshman year at Ole Miss, where he was breaking all those records in the SEC. It's really fun to watch. And when you're that talented, where you're running for over 1,500 yards as a freshman in the SEC, and you're a 3-year producer, a national champion, it's going to be hard to argue that this is not a guy who deserves to go in the top 2 rounds of the NFL draft.
100%. And I think there's something to say about both, Judkins and TreVeyon Henderson, who we'll get to later as a little foreshadow. I mean, to be a part of kind of a 2-headed monster that, you're kind of sharing these carries and you're still making the most of them. I mean, it's scary to see a guy running 220 pounds who's, muscly, running a 4.4, and is just super explosive. I mean, there's really not much to not like about this guy. I mean, he has kind of those ideal running back qualities with size, the speed, the toughness, willing to put the shoulder down to get those kind of gritty yards. Big fan of his play. And I think he could have been much higher in a lot of people's, lists if he wasn't sharing a lot of time with TreVeyon Henderson.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people were kind of sleeping on his athleticism too. Just watching him next to TreVeyon, obviously he's just a faster guy than Quinshon, right? The speed jumps off the tape with TreVeyon. But at the same time, I think people were kind of forgetting Quinshon Judkins weighs 220 pounds and he ran, high 4.4s at the combine. So this is a hell of an athlete in his own right. He had a great, he had very good jumps. He's a bursty guy. He's explosive. So people were kind of like, hey, this is the boring like pounder, he's the thunder to TreVeyon's lightning. But I think they're kind of not giving him enough credit when they label him that way. So I'm excited to see where he lands and if he gets that 3-down role at the next level.
Yeah, and I think you hit it right on the nail. I mean, I think people underestimate his ability to be a pass catcher. I think he didn't show much tape being a pass catcher because if you have TreVeyon Henderson, I mean, why would you need to kind of rely on Quinshon Judkins as a pass catcher? So, what are some things that you think teams are afraid of or feel like he kind of could work on to get to when he gets to the next level?
I think one of the things you brought up is just like you just said, he's not a passing game weapon right now. Maybe he could turn into that down the road. He's serviceable in the passing game, but he's not a TreVeyon Henderson. So that's one part of his game that teams are not as high on. But it's really hard to find weaknesses, in my opinion. I mean, you could look at stats and you could say, oh, he didn't have the best efficiency. He didn't have the most yards after contact. But I think that you could find a stat to make any argument you want. And for me, totally. I'm a guy, I like to rely on the tape. And my eyes tell me that he's a hell of a running back. And he's a violent runner. And I think he's going to be successful at the next level. And just it's really hard to understate what Quinshon and TreVeyon were able to do last year, man. I mean, they both went for incredible stats while they're sharing a workload with each other, right? I mean, 100%. They win a national championship. Quinshon, I believe, had 3 touchdowns in the national championship game. So that is another positive, right? He shows up in the biggest
Yeah, he
game.
definitely ate in the big and he ate in big games for sure.
Yeah, so I think Quinshon's a dog, man. I think he's right up there with the top 3. I don't think there's a huge separation between him and the guys in front of him.
And I think there's something that to say about being on a team with a lot of talent, and a lot of the eyes are going to these elite receivers and Will Howard as the quarterback. And I mean, when it came down to it, Quinshon Judkins performed at the national championship. He was the spark that they kind of needed, right? And so, I think he's been slept on ever since leaving Ole Miss. And I think this year, because he wasn't the flashy star that he was earlier in his career, a lot of people are kind of underestimating his potential at the next level.
Yep. I think that the main knock on him is going to be he got worse every year of his career if you look at his stats, right? I mean, He was incredible as a freshman, still very, very good as a sophomore, but not as good. Then he kind of took another step down as a junior, as statistically at least. But context is important. He's sharing with our number 3 running back, TreVeyon Henderson, which is kind of a good segue into our next guy if you want to get into it.
Yep, number 3, TreVeyon Henderson, Ohio State. Now, TreVeyon, our number 3 prospect, one of my favorite prospects actually in this draft. I think he's a guy that, people see his size. He's not the biggest guy, but he's not small. I think he's 5'10", 205. He's not a tiny running back. But I mean, he ran well at the combine. Very, very fast, very flashy. And what I love about him is regardless of, maybe being a slightly undersized runner, he finishes runs very well. He has great bursts. He's a guy that can get from 0 to 100 very quickly and is willing to fall forward and finish those runs. I mean, against the team that they played this year, he's averaged 7 yards a carry this year. I mean, he's just that type of number just shows that he's producing at a high level, especially against the caliber of teams that Ohio State played this year.
Yeah, he's an electric guy, man. I mean, in the receiving game, you see when you get him out in open space, it's fun to watch. It really is.
Yeah. And I think one thing too, we spoke about, Quinshon Judkins and kind of having a committee at running back. But when you get to the NFL level, that's what we're seeing a lot more these days, right? We're seeing these committee running backs, and the fact that he did it for kind of most of his career and still put up elite numbers, to me actually is encouraging. He's a guy that, regardless of whether he's sharing time or splitting time, when he's out there, he's going to produce, and he wants to produce for his team, and he's going to go all out. And regardless of his size, he's the guy that's going to just grit and kind of keep pushing for those yards. One thing though that kind of leads me to is the fact that against the kind of better defenses, his yards per carry weren't as high. Actually, in fact, it weren't nearly as high as that 7 number, that he averaged out to. And so, there were times where against some better defenses, he wasn't able to get those extra yardage. He wasn't able to kind of turn those legs, which could speak to him being a little bit undersized at the next level.
Yeah, I think he's not going to be a guy who's going to come in and get 100% of the touches or 90% of the touches like a Saquon Barkley, right? I don't think he's built like that. But I don't know if he needs to be. Like, you see a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, right? Splitting 100%. Work with David Montgomery. You complement him with a guy who takes all the hits, who kind of pounds it in between the tackles. And I think that's going to preserve his body so that he's able to, have a nice long career at the NFL level. And just to speak to that a little bit further, one of my only concerns with him as a prospect is his ability to stay healthy. He had a great freshman year, right? He was an incredible player as a freshman, true freshman in the Big Ten. And then he kind of had some injury problems as a sophomore and junior. And then they brought in Quinshon Judkins, and he was able to stay healthy again as a senior. So I think that kind of lays out the blueprint for an NFL team, right? I think they need to complement him with a bruiser, complement him with a guy who's a little bigger and a little stronger.
Yeah, and you know what? Speaking of his kind of running style, I do see flashes of like a Jamal Charles, right? Somebody who isn't going to be running straight up the middle, but can still run off tackle pretty well, is really tough to tackle in open space, and has enough breakaway speed to kind of finish those runs. I was watching some tape of Jamal Charles, and I was like, man, I could just see TreVeyon Henderson being this type of player, a player that is a very productive player at the next level.
I love that comp, man. That's a great comp. I actually haven't heard that one too much, so that's a fun one. Jamal was incredible to watch on the Chiefs. So.
And what's funny is, they're similar in that they can kind of get those extra yards if they need to. They can get those goal line runs, as we just saw right there, but they also can be very, very threatening in the passing game. They are really tough to cover one-on-one, really tough to tackle one-on-one. So there's a lot of things I like about TreVeyon Henderson for sure.
Yeah, good luck being a linebacker covering that guy in the passing game. So he's a guy I could see sneaking into the late first round if someone wants to get a game changer at the running back position. Probably early second is going to be his floor as far as draft capital goes, right?
100%. And I think, obviously that's not going to happen, but pairing him up with a guy like our number 2 prospect would be a really good for TreVeyon's, longevity.
Absolutely. And our number 2 prospect is going to be Omarion Hampton from North Carolina. All right. So Omarion Hampton, like you said, he's kind of a bigger prototypical 3-down running back, right? He's built at around 220 pounds, 6 foot tall. My comp for him is Joe Mixon. I also see a little bit of Jonathan Taylor in his game. But he's going to be a dude who can catch a ball. He can run in between the tackles. He's so well-rounded. And when I was watching him in the drills at the combine, I just couldn't help but think, like, this guy's built like a tank. And he also just so smooth and so functionally athletic. It's really hard to find weaknesses in his game, man. I don't know what your thoughts are on him, but he's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of, drawing up a running back of somebody that, what I want someone to look like at an NFL running back, that's Omarion Hampton. I mean, he has the size, he has the speed, his strength when he's running the ball. I mean, he's gonna be a good NFL prospect for sure.
Yeah, and I mean at 220 pounds, he is a dude that can take that. He can take the pounding. He can take the full workload, the three down workload, and it's going to be interesting to see where he lands because I do think he's going to be a first round pick at this point. You're seeing a lot of buzz, Denver, maybe Pittsburgh. There's some spots that need running backs there in the late
Yeah.
first range, and it's hard for me to imagine him falling out of the first round, but. Tell me if I'm wrong, man. Tell me if I'm
Yeah,
wrong.
I think him being out of the first round would be the biggest shock of the draft. I mean, he's a guy that has top 10 potential. One thing I think the only thing that I could kind of critique of him is as good of a runner as he is and as good of the size he is, I kind of wish he had a little bit better, shiftiness. And I also wish, he had that kind of Cam Skattebo mentality at times. He is such a big back with a lot of speed that I mean he could really punish some defenders. And at times, I felt like that wasn't always the case. He didn't always try to finish those runs, which again, for longevity might be the smart move, but would love to see a, 220-pound muscle, speedy running back just lay the boom on people.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, he's not going to be a guy who's going to be making people miss with dead leg, with juke, spins. He's not that kind of back, but he is a one cut, straight line runner. And we've seen that work at the NFL level with guys like Jonathan Taylor. So I think he can be very
100%.
successful. But you're right. It's not like he's Ashton Jeanty or anything, right?
Totally, which is a good transition to number one, Ashton Jeanty. All right, Jeanty is a guy that is a very, very elite prospect, a very unique prospect. A guy coming out of Boise State, so non-Power Five school, who a lot of people were worried about the caliber of talent that he was playing against. But I mean, I can't help but see flashes of my favorite player of all time, Maurice Jones-Drew. I mean, he's a compact runner who hides behind his offensive line very well. He's a guy that had almost 2,000 yards after contact. I mean, he just bounces off these guys, is so difficult to tackle because of his kind of compact stature. Ranked number one with 152 force missed tackles, is a guy that just carried this Boise State team to the college football playoffs.
It's just insane, dude. Watching the kind of missed tackles that he forced. 2,000 yards after contact. I mean, it's rare that we even see a running back run for 2,000 yards. Period. So
Totally.
the fact that he's getting touched in the backfield, he's getting hit in the backfield. Arm tackles do nothing for this guy. This guy is a freaking tank. Squats almost 500 pounds. Weight room, rat. It's hard to see weaknesses in his game. He's a very good pass catcher. I love the Maurice Jones-Drew comp, and I think he can be a similar level talent at the next level.
100%. I mean, in my opinion, Maurice Jones-Drew is a Hall of Fame, talent player, but I mean, he's still a borderline regardless, borderline Hall of Fame guy. And I think Jeanty would be very, very happy to have a career like that. And I can't help but see so many comparisons between them. I mean, he's a guy that, can finish runs, but is patient and is so difficult. It just bounces off guys. One thing that I kind of am fearful of is not like necessarily his catching ability, because I think he has the ability to make catches, but he only had 23 receptions in 2024, which is a very low amount compared to the amount of touches he had, when he was carrying the ball. So I think at the next level, you have to have the ability and the confidence to catch those passes, to be an every down back. I think also due to his kind of shorter stature, he didn't grade super well in his pass blocking. And I think, again, as somebody who wants to be an every down back, you have to be willing to put your nose down and make those pass blocks. And, that's something that I think teams are really going to want him to improve so that he can be that kind of bell cow that he was at the college level.
Absolutely. I mean, I do think it is worth pointing out that the year before, right? So not this year, but the year prior, he did have almost, I believe it's around 500 receiving yards. So he was much more involved last year in the passing game. And I don't know why they decided to use him less. Maybe it's just because they were handing him the damn ball.
When you're feeding him, yeah, I wouldn't throw it. I wouldn't throw it to him if I had to I could just hand it off to him and let him, work his magic.
Yeah, no, I mean it's really not. I don't think it's a guy that we have to belabor the point on too much. He's probably a top 5 pick if I had to bet on it. I think he's definitely a top 10 pick. And I'm curious, are there any landing spots that you'd love to see him?
I mean, I think he's mocked very often by people to the Raiders, and I love that match. I think, the Raiders just signed Raheem Mostert as kind of a veteran back who, can kind of lead by example. And you have a guy like Pete Carroll who's done amazing things with the similar style running backs. I mean, we saw a little bit of Marshawn when we were looking at tape here. And I mean, you saw what Pete Carroll did with Marshawn in Seattle. And I think having a veteran guy like, Geno under center as well, who can really help a young running back. To be honest, I think this is a piece that if the Raiders get, they might turn around, their chances. I mean, you still have great other talent around them. You have Jacoby Myers as a pretty good receiver 1. You have great tight ends with Brock Bowers. You now brought in a true quarterback 1. You have a true, head coach 1, if you want to call it that, with Pete Carroll. Mm-hmm. I think Jeanty would be super stoked to, land with the Raiders. And I think the Raiders would be super stoked to bring in his talent early on in the draft.
Yeah, I think the GM of the Raiders made a joke the other day about his kids killing him if he doesn't, if he passes up on Ashton Jeanty if he's there at 6. But it'll be interesting to see if he even does slip to 6, because I could see possibly your Jags looking at him. I could see the Patriots maybe considering him.
Yeah,
I know it's super early, so we'll see how NFL teams value running back these days, because I think that's the only argument against him. For me, he's a clear generational prospect, and he's a clear top-ranked running back.
Yeah, and I think he would be the number 1 prospect and number 1 running back prospects in most drafts that we've seen in the past decade. I think of maybe Jonathan Taylor, Saquon as guys that would be in front of him, but this guy has a lot of the qualities to be an elite running back at the next level. And I think very early on in his career, he's going to make some noise as a top running back.
100%.
Well, I think that that is a good way to end it there.
All right. And with that, we want to thank everyone who's made it this far with us in the video. If there's anyone in our top 5 rankings that you disagree with, please feel free to let us have it in the comments. Tell us your opinions. Did we miss someone? Did we include someone that shouldn't have been included? Who are your favorite sleepers for this class? We want to hear from you. And we also look forward to bringing you our top 5 wide receivers and tight ends next time around.
Thanks, y'all.